Hi everyone, my name is Vince Gelman, and a topic that I'm really passionate about is grief and grieving. And in my healing practice with my clients, one of the questions I often get asked is, can I heal my grief? Or they say they want to heal their grief. And my response is usually to say to them, what if it's not so much about healing the grief, but learning to befriend it, learning to feel it, learning to embody it as an act of love to self, as an act of love to those things that we miss or that we've lost. And that could be people, places, objects. So grieving is something that we're not good at in our Western culture. We've lost touch with the capacity to feel at the depth that grief often demands. In traditional societies, in certain indigenous cultures around the world, grieving has long been a communal practice where they gather together and using the aid of ceremony or ritual and drumming and fire and chanting, they wail, they weep, they let themselves go, they get messy in their grief. They even in certain cultures have women in particular, more than men, who are the ones who initiate the grieving process so the other people in the community can really let go, because women are generally better at connecting to those big emotions than men are. So you have these professional grievers in those tribes that really help to invoke that emotion in people so it can be released. We in our culture here, where we're much more isolated, we're disconnected from family and friends, and many of us live alone in small apartments, we don't have the necessary support to really go into the depths of grieving that's needed. We hire professionals, we hire therapists, for instance, or breath workers. But unfortunately, we don't have the people around us that can really help us to go deep into the grief that's stored in our body. And so, in my opinion, grieving is it's a lost art. It's a lost skill, and it's an interesting thing to think about it as a skill. It's a skill that I feel, we need to improve at for our mental, emotional, physical, spiritual health. We have to allow that grief to come out, as I said earlier, as an act of love to self and others, places, people, things. And one of the things I say to my clients when they say they want to heal their grief is, what if the grieving process is an act of you expressing how much you love that person, and if you didn't have the grief, you wouldn't love that person as much. So by grieving, you're actually saying to that person, whether they are nearby on the other side of the planet, or they've moved on, they've departed, you're actually saying to them in your grieving how much you love them. So if we were to heal the grief or to remove the grief from you, you wouldn't have the chance to really feel and express that love. And so for me, love and grief, or love and grieving, are forever intertwined. They're two sides of the same coin, or two sides of the same heart. And so it's not about healing the grief, in my opinion. It's actually about healing the pain that gave rise to the grief. It's about healing the pain that gave rise to the grief. So when we have a traumatic incident, such as the loss of someone, or the loss of our home in, say, a natural disaster, or it could be something like our child moves away to the other side of the planet, we can be really struck by pain. We can have like a blow to the heart. We often say, I take it to heart. And that's where, in my opinion, in the heart, that's where we hold the deepest wounds. We carry the deepest wounds is in the heart. So that pain is actually what gives rise to the grief. And so when we grieve, it can be painful. But that's not, in my opinion, because the grief itself is painful, but because it's unlocking the pain that gave rise to the grief. And so we don't want to feel the grief because we're not comfortable with emotion, generally speaking, in our Western world, but also because we don't want to touch into the pain. And yet we need to, because when we don't touch into the pain, we start to get chest pain, we get heart pain, we get pressures building in our chest area or other parts of the body, which then contribute to physical, emotional, mental, spiritual ailments. So it is a great act of self-love to allow ourselves to feel that grief. And I understand that it can be tricky, especially when we're not used to grieving, when we haven't built up the skills, the emotional intelligence, we don't necessarily have the self-awareness or the confidence to go down into our body to feel that, which again is why in traditional societies it's been held at a community level, or in the Western world we hire professionals like therapists to help us be with that grief. In one personal experience, after the ending of a 3-year relationship, I was hit with so much grief. It absolutely, I felt like it was going to blow me apart. I felt like I was being swept up by a raging river and I had no control over it. And it was in that moment, and I had done lots of grieving before then, but never to that level of intensity. And it was at that moment that I realized that grief is often more than just an emotion. It can be a force of nature. And so we often do need support to feel that grief. And so if you imagine going down into the well of grief as a metaphor, we can go down deeper if we know someone is at the top that we trust who's holding the rope, so that if we get too overwhelmed, they can pull us up. So we can go deeper into the well of grief if we know there's someone there for us who has us, has our hand, has our back, and can help us come out. And so that is the wisdom of seeking help, to feel that. If you've done enough inner work like myself, then you can now go into that grief more fluidly, more confidently, and you know you're not going to get stuck. And for me, grieving is an ongoing practice. The last 5 months I've been weeping a lot. Some days I wail. It's amazing what comes out of me, but what's actually happening is that my heart is breaking. My heart is breaking open to more and more capacity to feel love, to connect to my higher self, to connect to spirit. And I just then have more and more range, more ability to hold wider and wider landscapes of love. And that is the gift of heartbreak. That is the gift of grieving or grief work, is that it opens us to hold more and more love, to give love, to receive love, to feel love. And so grief is such a blessing to us. It's an act of self-love that can then extend outwardly to others because we just have more love in us to give. And the tendency in our culture is to want to fix grief, to make it better. But what happens is we deny all the blessings that come with feeling grief, with opening our heart that comes with the grief. We deny our capacity to share more love. And so I'd like to also say that, if you are experiencing something like myself right now, where you are regularly grieving and you're regularly feeling heartbreak, the skill is actually to live with a broken heart. Not to fix it, not to make it better, but what if we learned as a life skill to live with a broken heart? And what a strange concept that is. I can imagine many people thinking, well, how am I going to get anything done? But what happens in our culture is we make getting things done more important than living with heartbreak, tending to our heart, being with our grief. And so I propose those are two skills. One is grieving, and one is just generally living with heartbreak without the need to make ourselves better. And again, what a gift that is, to have our heart break again and again and again. How much more compassionate we are to the world, to the suffering of the world, to all the heartbreak that is going throughout our planet right now. We can be more available emotionally. Even if we are on the other side of the world, we can feel more fully for what is happening in other people's emotional challenges. We can feel more fully for them because we can feel more fully. And I'll say that again, I can feel more fully for you if I can feel more fully in my body. And so again, going back to my client's question, why would we want to heal that? Why would we want to heal all the blessings that come from grieving? No, in my opinion, it's about learning to feel so that we can open our heart more and more and more. And so that is what I want to offer you today, is that, grief is love and love is grief. And what a blessing to allow it into our heart, both grief and love, to ourselves, to others, to Mother Earth. So thank you so much for listening. And if you enjoyed this video, I invite you to subscribe, to click yes to notifications. And also in the description, there's an article I'll put in there that'll go further into this topic. So you'll find that in the description. Or if you're watching this on Instagram, I'm going to put it on my link in my bio. So thank you, everyone, and I wish you well, connecting to your heart, connecting to your grief, connecting to the truth of who you are. Blessings.